During a heated live talk show, Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, found himself the target of unexpected disrespect. The host, smug, confrontational, and clearly intent on provocation, opened the segment with a pointed jab. But what unfolded next would stun the studio, silence his critics, and electrify viewers around the world. From the moment Traoré entered the studio, calm and composed in a modest suit, it was clear he hadn't come for spectacle. There were no flashy medals, no entourage, only focused eyes and unshakable posture. He greeted the crew with warmth. The host, Marc Delarme, didn't rise to shake his hand. The cameras rolled. The host leaned forward with a smirk. "President Traoré," he began. "Should I call you that or rebel commander?" A ripple of tension passed through the audience. Traoré didn't react. He didn't blink. Silence. "Tell me," Marc continued, "do you actually believe you have the experience to sit with real-world leaders?" He thought he had landed a blow. He smiled for the camera. But the applause he expected never came. Traoré leaned back. His face held no anger, only a quiet, commanding disappointment. He turned his gaze toward the audience. His eyes found a young black girl in the front row, wide-eyed, hopeful. Then, finally, he spoke. "In my country," he said, his voice steady, "we don't measure a man's worth by how much he wears on his chest, but by how many children sleep safely at night because of him." The studio held its breath. Marc shifted in his chair, trying to regain control. "Well, you've been accused of." Traoré raised a hand, firm, respectful. "Let me finish." The audience leaned in. "People like you," he said slowly, "think power is wearing a tie in Paris. But real power is standing in front of your people when bullets fly, and refusing to run." Gasps echoed. Even Marc's practiced smirk faltered. Traoré leaned forward now, softer but sharper. "You ask if I belong among world leaders. I ask you, do they belong among their people?" In the control room, one producer whispered, "He flipped it." Another replied, "No, he owned it." Back in the studio, Marc tried to claw his way back. "That's poetic, President, but poetry doesn't stop terrorists." Traoré's jaw tensed. Then, he smiled gently. "You're right," he said, "but dignity does. Hope does. A leader without hope is more dangerous than any gunman." And then, he reached into his jacket and unfolded a piece of paper. "This is a letter," he said, "from a 9-year-old girl in Kaya. Her village was attacked. She lost her father. And still, she wrote to thank me for protecting her school." His voice trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of truth. He read the letter aloud. As he did, the audience grew utterly silent, not with fear, but with shared grief. When he finished, even the cameraman's hands were shaking. Marc stared down at his notes, defeated. This was no longer a debate, it was a reckoning. Then, from the crowd, a woman stood, dark-skinned, softly dressed. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I know you," she said through a broken voice. "My father used to speak of men like you, leaders who fight for their people, not for money." Marc tried to intervene.
"Mom, this is not enough!"
she cried. "You sit there mocking him. But you've never had to protect a village. You've never held a dying child. You've never stood alone against the world." The room was frozen. Ibrahim Traoré didn't move. His eyes stayed locked with hers. "You're not just a guest," she whispered. "You're hope." That word, hope, hung in the air like fire and light. And no one dared to speak after that. Marc looked lost, fidgeting with his pen. For the first time, he realized this wasn't just politics. It was pain, history, pride. And someone had just awakened a sleeping lion. By dawn, the internet had erupted. TikTok loops, YouTube shorts, Facebook reposts. The woman's cry, "You're not just a guest. Your hope," was everywhere. 100 languages, 1,000 translations, millions of shares. And in every clip, right beside her, was Ibrahim Traoré, silent, steady, not a trace of anger. No clapback, just dignity. In Ouagadougou, students marched peacefully through the streets, holding cardboard signs, "Hope wears uniform." Our voice is no longer silent. In a Paris cafe, a young African boy watched the clip on a tablet. He turned to his mother and asked, "Is he a king?" She smiled. "No," she said. "Something better. He's a servant of his people." Meanwhile, Marc's employers weren't smiling. His bosses called an emergency meeting. Sponsors threatened to pull out. Comment sections were brutal. The backlash was swift and loud, and yet Traoré said nothing. No post, no tweet, no boast. Because when a lion walks, he doesn't need to roar. Later that week, the studio called his team, desperate. Please, bring him back. This time, a full hour. No interruptions. Total respect. The president didn't respond right away. That evening, while phones rang unanswered, he walked quietly through the streets of Lyon, visiting a refugee shelter. No press, no cameras, just his presence. A little girl hugged him and whispered, "They say you're like magic." He knelt beside her.
"I'm just a man,"
he said gently. But magic happens when people believe in each other. Back at the hotel, his assistant handed him the official invitation for a second appearance. He read it slowly, then looked up and said softly, "Tell them I accept." A pause. "But this time, I'll bring my brothers with me." "Which brothers, sir?" the assistant asked. Traoré smiled. "The ones whose voices were never invited." The second appearance wasn't just a return. It was a reckoning. This time, Traoré didn't walk into the studio alone. Behind him came a silent line of guests, men and women from across Africa and the diaspora. A nurse from Bamako, a war orphan from Sudan, a professor from Dar es Salaam. Each one carried a story. Each had been unheard for years. Mark stood waiting, trying to smile, but his lips twitched. The audience noticed. Traoré extended his hand. "Thank you for inviting us," he said calmly. "We've brought some truths with us." But there was no anger in his voice. But the air grew heavy. As the guests sat and the cameras rolled, history began to rewrite itself. The nurse spoke first. She held up a photo of a burned-down hospital in Burkina Faso. "Terrorists destroyed this place," she said. "President Traoré sent supplies within 48 hours. No press, no speeches. He just acted." Mark blinked, speechless. Next, the professor spoke. "My university was losing its funding. He redirected his own salary for an entire semester so we could keep our doors open." One by one, the stories flowed. No shouting, no spin, just truth. The audience was silent. Mark's face turned pale. This wasn't the show he had planned, and it was far from over. Then the final guest stood, a boy, maybe 12, nervous, small, but burning with something fierce inside. He cleared his throat. His French was hesitant. "I don't have a papa," he said. "I live in a camp." One day, President Traoré came.
"No camera, no car."
Just him. Silence. "I told him I wanted to be a soldier." He paused. He said, "No. Be a builder. Build what they tried to destroy." And with that, the room fell completely still. Not out of fear, but out of reverence. Because in that moment, they weren't just witnessing a leader speak. They were watching a new chapter of history being written. "By the hands of the unheard, he gave me shoes," the boy whispered. "And books." The crowd gasped. Slowly, he reached into his tattered jacket and pulled out a small, worn French book. "He gave me this." A tear rolled down his cheek. "He gave me dreams." Silence. The kind that commands reverence. Mark looked down. He had nothing left to say. Because in that moment, something greater than ratings had entered the studio. Truth. The audience had changed. They weren't entertained. They were awakened. And that terrified him. Mark slammed his hand on the table. "Enough of this emotional circus," he snapped. Gasps rippled through the room. "You're a president, not a preacher," Mark barked. "This is politics, not a sob story session." But Traoré didn't flinch. Calmly, he looked at Mark. "Maybe you confuse power with noise," he said. "Let me show you what real power looks like." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. A live document from the government of Burkina Faso. Screens lit up behind them, real-time data, reforms in motion, schools reopening, farmers receiving aid, no speeches, no slogans, just proof. Mark's jaw fell open. The audience began to clap, not for drama, but from somewhere deeper, from the soul. Backstage, an assistant secretly recorded the moment on her phone. She caught Traoré turning to Mark. "History won't remember insults," he said quietly, "but it will never forget impact." That clip hit social media in minutes. Within an hour, 1 million views. By nightfall, 10 million. In dusty villages across Burkina Faso, boys huddled around radios replaying every word. In France, celebrities reposted the video in stunned admiration. Even critics admitted, he didn't shout, he stood. People cried, not from pity, but from pride. Because finally they saw a leader who didn't perform, he proved. After the broadcast, Mark stormed into the green room, his hands shaking as he poured a glass of water. He had underestimated Ibrahim Traoré, not just the man, but the movement he carried: truth, vision, pain, hope. The door creaked open. Traoré stepped in, alone. This time, Mark said nothing. The president walked up to him and said gently, "The world doesn't need more loud men. It needs brave ones." Then he turned and walked away. Mark sat down slowly, staring at the now empty seat across the room. He didn't know it yet, but his life had just changed, and so had millions of others. By morning, the video had reached every corner of Africa. In Ouagadougou, an old man wiped his eyes. "That's my president," he whispered to his grandchildren. In Paris, a young girl hugged her mother. "He looks like us," she said, "and he speaks with heart." Across Europe, media outlets scrambled to control the narrative. Some called Traoré too emotional. Others warned he was dangerous. But none could deny one truth: the people were rising behind him. At the presidential residence in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim sat with his team. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't celebrating. He was thinking, because something had started, and it could no longer be stopped. His phone buzzed. A number he didn't recognize. He answered. A soft voice spoke, hesitantly, in broken French. It was Mariam, a nurse from northern Burkina Faso. "I don't know if this is really you," she said, "but thank you. My son saw your video and told me, Mama, I want to be like him. I've never seen him so proud to be Burkinab." Ibrahim's voice cracked. He didn't say much, just 2 words. "Thank you." After the call, he stood at the window of his hotel room, looking toward the glowing Eiffel Tower in the distance. But his heart wasn't in Paris. It was in Kaya, in Dori, in the dusty streets of Bobo Dioulasso. This wasn't about television anymore. It was about dignity. Mark hadn't slept. He replayed the video over and over. He had mocked a man who stood for millions. He had spoken over pain. And now, for the first time, he finally heard it. The world didn't cancel him. They ignored him. And somehow that hurt more. In the sterile studio that once thrived on applause and ego, producers whispered about ratings, sponsorships, and contingency plans. Mark had become a liability. The show that once had commanded viewers across continents now hovered on the edge of obscurity. Yet instead of retreating, Mark made a rare decision. He went live again. Alone, no crowd, no applause sign, just a man and a camera facing something heavier than criticism, conscience. He looked straight into the lens, unfiltered. "I disrespected a man who represents something I didn't understand," he said, voice taut with humility. "I was arrogant. I was wrong." The clip didn't go viral. It didn't trend. There were no explosive comment sections, no reposts by influencers. But somewhere, in a quiet corner of a dimly lit office, Ibrahim Traoré saw it. He didn't smile because he'd won anything. He smiled because finally, the truth had been acknowledged. Not for him, but for what he stood for: dignity, legacy, unseen lives. Across Africa, people didn't just watch that moment. They felt it. In Accra, university students marched with handmade signs reading, "Ibrahim, you spoke for us." In Bamako, elders gathered around radios, their faces stoic but proud, as they listened to replays of the interview. Even in forgotten refugee camps across the Sahel, children mimicked Traoré's steady tone, repeating his words in broken but proud voices. The streets of Burkina Faso swelled with life. Not in protest, but in celebration. Young people once shackled by disillusion now stood tall, flags in hand, voices lifted. The same ones who once said, "What's the point?" now whispered, "There's hope." Traoré never asked for applause, but the world gave it anyway, not because he demanded it, but because he earned it, quietly, completely. One day, a letter arrived at the presidency. It was from a woman in the village of Fada. She didn't expect it to be read, let alone answered. But it reached him. "President Ibrahim," she wrote, her handwriting uneven. "My son died last year during a terrorist attack. We buried him with no flag. Today I watched you on that French program. I cried. Not because I was sad, but because for the first time, I felt seen. Thank you for making us proud to be from this land." A grieving mother. Ibrahim held that letter for a long time. He didn't move. Then he walked out alone into the hotel courtyard. The Paris skyline shimmered above him, distant and foreign. He looked at the stars and whispered, "Not just for her, but for all of them, I will not stop." 6 days after the interview, Traoré returned to Ouagadougou. No red carpet, no brass band. But tens of thousands lined the road from the airport to the city. They didn't wave signs. They didn't chant. They simply placed their right hand over their hearts. A silent gesture of respect. Even the children stood still. When Ibrahim stepped off the plane, he didn't raise his hands. He didn't wave. He just looked at them and nodded. No words, no speeches. He had already said enough. That single image, a leader walking quietly into his homeland, embraced not by noise but by unity, became the most shared video of the year. No music, no graphics, just truth. He hadn't fought with rage, he fought with dignity. And the world listened, and would keep listening. If this story reached your heart, don't scroll past it. If even one tear welled in your eyes, let it mean something. Comment with a single word: respect. And if you believe in truth and courage, in the rising strength of Africa, share this story. Let the world know that men like Ibrahim Traoré still walk among us. Thank you for watching. Long live courage. Long live Burkina Faso.